Welcome, everyone. My name is Ellen Teller, and I am the proud president of the Jewish Federation of Somerset, Hunterdon, and Warren counties. I welcome everyone tonight and look forward to everyone's participation regarding the important topic of unconscious bias and social equity in the Jewish community. But before we get to the interesting program that we've planned for tonight, I would be remiss to not remind everyone of the impact that our Jewish Federation is having on our tri-county and global Jewish community. At the beginning of our Zoom program, you were able to really see some of the ways the Federation is helping those around us, near and far. This is an exciting year for us. We're celebrating our 60th year of existence, and we are elated about how far we have come together as a community. For 60 years, we have been protecting our most vulnerable neighbors, educating our children and community about anti-Semitism, racism, and hatred, reacting to emergencies in our own Jewish community and other Jewish communities in the US, Israel, and more globally, aiding Holocaust survivors worldwide, and really opening our tent as wide as we can and putting our collective arms around everyone we can. The Federation is here to make the world a better place, and we are working hard to make that a reality. As many of you know, because so many of you have helped financially during our 2020 annual campaign, our Federation raised more than $1 million for the first time in our history. The community came together collectively to take care of the people and organizations that mean so much to us in this community, and we thank you. This additional fundraising is allowing us to make additional allocations to the JCC, the Jewish Family Service, the Joint Distribution Committee, and sizable donations to each synagogue in our Tri-County area. We are thrilled to be able to provide this money so that important programs can be developed and everyone in the community can benefit from the generous support that has been provided by so many. The Jewish Federation is committed to being our community convener. We are here for you and your loved ones today, tomorrow, and forever. With that, I'd like to turn the program over to Jeff Schwartz, Chair of the Federation's Community Relations Committee, to introduce our exciting speaker for the evening. Jeff?
Great. Thanks again, Ellen. We're really excited about tonight's speaker. Before telling you a little bit about him, I'll give you a brief description of the CRC, and then I'll introduce tonight's speaker. So as the central community relations agency of the organized Jewish community in our area, the CRC seeks to foster a society based on freedom, justice, and democratic pluralism that affords Jews and all people individual security and equal opportunity. The CRC achieves this goal through our work in government relations, Israel advocacy, intergroup relations, and social justice. On behalf of the Federation's constituent agencies, organizations, and synagogues in the Somerset, Hunterdon, and Warren counties, the CRC builds a consensus on a broad range of public policy issues central to the Jewish conscience and concern, and then advocates based on those concerns to federal, state, local legislators, civic, public opinion, media, and interfaith leaders. The CRC also coordinates community programs such as the one tonight on information and advocacy for priority domestic and international issues. Now, there'll be a quiz on all of that at the end of this evening. I will be distributing Scantron exams for all of you to fill in the little circles on what is the correct answer. But prior to that, we're going to have a very prominent speaker join us and with remarks. Rabbi Isaiah Joseph Rothstein recently joined the Jewish Federations of North America professional team as a rabbinic scholar and public affairs advisor. He most recently served as rabbi in residence at Hazan, the Jewish Lab for Sustainability, and is the co-founder of the Jewish Youth Climate Movement and Kamocha, Community for Black Orthodox Jews. Rabbi Rothstein served as the spiritual leader at Carmel Academy in Greenwich, Connecticut. He worked. He attended Binghamton University, followed by Yeshiva University for his master's in social work and Smicha. Rabbi Rothstein is a member of the Schusterstein Foundation's ROI Fellowship and was listed as one of the Jewish Week's 36 under 36. In his spare time, Rabbi Isaiah is writing a musical about Queen Esther, timely given the recent passing of Purim. and performs music with his band. Isaiah currently lives in Harlem, New York. So, one programming note before I turn it over to you, Rabbi. If you have questions following Rabbi's remarks, we'll be going through a Q&A. Just enter your questions in the chat, and we'll answer them at the end. Alternately, you can, on the little toolbar on the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a little reactions button. If you click that reactions button and raise your hand after Rabbi Rothstein's remarks, we'll call on you and you could you're welcome to ask your question live. Given the size of the group we have tonight, we welcome interactive feedback from you guys. So with that, Rabbi, please take us forward.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Jeff. I appreciate your lovely and generous introductions. Ellen, as well to you, thank you so much for your words. Robin, to the rest of the team, to Lauren, to Shayna, to everyone who brought us together, just thank you. And I'll just say that just the jazz as music to start us off is its own kind of relaxation at the end of the day. I think we're all in the same time zone. So that's nice. But then also to see the slides, really warming. Again, also as Ellen was sharing, as Jeff was sharing about our impact, the work that we do, what the Jewish Federations have done, what CRCs have done to support Jewish communal life and the public square. Like, it's pretty, I know that we've maybe have seen the data or seen the slides, but like, just to even let that sink in, combined with the jazz, it's all the more so inspiring. So it's just really good to be here with you.
I just thought Shayna was playing Homeland in the background. And
nice. Yes. It's real. It's real. And about that quiz at the end, before the Q&A, after the Q&A, the private chats, people, if we need to share, Spark Notes in the chat, as Jeff tests us, we can do that as well. So I'm sharing my screen just to get us started. And I wanted to say that, one of the lines, at least for me, Hayom Katsar v'hamalacha meruba. I think about this a lot, right? There's so much work to do in the world. And, and days are only so long. So I appreciate that you've taken time out of your day to be here with us, especially as we learn together about what it means to partner and what is it, who is in the tent? Who's the we? Who's the Jewish community that we talk about? And how do we reimagine that? And then also, what are the steps that maybe we can take as a community when it comes to building a world from love, an equitable world, a just world, a righteous world, and in our communities and supporting others. So just for tonight, I'll speak for about 15-ish minutes. And then from there, I hope that we could be in conversation. In addition to that, I'll also hope that you'll indulge me and we'll use the chat a little bit. I would love to hear from you throughout my remarks. So with our time, I'll tell you a little bit about my background. We'll talk about Jewish equity, diversity, and inclusion, what I call JEDI as an acronym for Jewish equity, diversity, and inclusion. We'll talk a little bit about Jews of color, Jewish racial diversity, and then also some of the work that I'm doing at JFNA. So with that said, just to start, as we come into this space, when you think of equity, diversity, and inclusion in the Jewish community, what first comes to mind? Like, what are those things that pop up for you? I would love to hear from you. Take a second. What comes to mind? What's the first thing that pops up for you? Put it in the chat. And obviously, friends, if the chat function for whatever reason is not accessible to you, feel free to unmute, but just try to keep your remarks slightly brief. So I'm seeing things in the chat already. Progress comes to mind. Yes, by the way, we've done a lot of work in this. Depends on who you ask, but this idea of equity is like embedded in the Jewish tradition throughout history, through the Torah, through our legacies. So the progress of, depending on which timeline you look at, there's been a lot of progress around building a righteous, equitable world, right? If you look at the 10 Commandments, there's a lot of equity going down. If you look at what Shabbat is about, and we'll define some of these terms. Okay, progress we saw, togetherness, amen to that. Justice, community, and it's interesting, justice, like there are equations here with these letters, E, D, I, J, justice, what is it? So they say E equals D plus I. Equity is when a world, a space, a community is D plus I. But then justice is when we're pursuing EDI, I guess, or when we're constantly engaging or trying to affect change. We're We're in a state of engaging in justice. Community, healing, Jews of color, disabled Jews, oppression, Jews, self-hatred, and Jewish bias. Again, that nuance, that peeling away the layers, opening our eyes, reimagining who is in the tent. It's interesting. Like I've in my life growing up in the ultra Orthodox community, I've border crossed a lot. I've also with my family being half my family being not Jewish, my mom being a convert to Judaism, I've experienced kind of being able to say wait, when we say the Jewish people, who are we talking about? Like when that rabbi says, and all of us should be together, I'm like, who are you talking about? I'm curious, who, I genuinely want to know who we're keeping in mind. And Nancy, that list that you're just slowly starting to build for us, I think is something that we should be thinking about more and more and more. Education, care for all, more to do. Okay, awesome. Thanks for bringing that into the space just as we got started. So there will be a few terms that we'll run through just today that we'll be using. Jewish, you maybe have heard this word, Jewish, but the way I'm thinking about the word Jewish is 3 or 4 things. One, the word Jewish is first used with the Jewish people after the destruction of the first temple. We're in the story of Purim even, we're seen as the Jewish people, Yehudim, or converting to Judaism as Mit Yahadim, joining the Jewish tribe. So Jewish is associated with exile, with diaspora, right? Jewish to me also points to the fact that the word Hebrew also comes from the word ivri, which means to be othered, right? That even in our Jewishness, we actually understand othered or being othered or supporting others who are othered, right? That's in our DNA. And then also just a reminder that as Jewish, we are inherently a global people. Some say we're the first global people, that we're in over 70 countries worldwide. If you Google even global Jewry, you'll see Jewish federations comes up and what we do in serving Jews all over the world. We speak over 100 languages, right? We're all, so that the mosaic of being Jewish to me inherently in the statement of Jewish. Equity is interesting. We could spend a lot of time on each of these, but the main thing I would say is equity is need-based. Equality is, I wear a size 12.5 shoe because we've all come together for this amazing event. Thank you so much. I'm going to gift everyone. I'm going to send you my shoe size. I'm going to gift everyone with a brand new pair of shoes. That's equality. And you would look at me and be like, yo, what are you talking about? I don't have a size 12.5 shoe. You didn't even ask me what shoe size I have. And you also know, by the way, what happens, right? When your shoe's not the right size, you get blisters, you can't walk as fast, maybe you trip on yourself. Equity is reminding each other that we have diversified needs. And by the way, we do this in everything, right? Supporting the most vulnerable. I would argue that everything that Jewish federations do is about equity, right? And we do it in classrooms around modified education for different students. That's equity. That's pointing to individual needs. And that experience of equity, of recognizing that, okay, yes, equality, we say, what do you mean? Come to our synagogue. Come. What do you mean? It's an open door. Saturday, come, right? Equity is saying, well, what barriers might exist? Or where's this person coming from that maybe how I'm communicating or how I'm marketing or how I'm doing X, Y, and Z might not actually. So equity is this topic we should spend more time on. I'll be brief with the next few definitions. Diversity just is. We just are. We're diverse. Whether we have diverse, that's inclusion, right? Whether our spaces look diverse, diversity though is not necessarily up to us, right? It just is. We're a diverse humanity. Inclusion is really whether, diversity is being invited to the party, they say, and inclusivity is being asked to dance, right? This idea of representation being celebrated. Also, inclusion is ongoing, it's intentional. These are just a few things that we'll think about. And the last will come up in the rest of my presentation is the term Jew of color, Jews of color, something that, at least in the last 20 years or so has become, and then in the last 5 years, all the more so, and then really in the last year has become a normative term when discussing Jewish racial diversity, people who are non-European Jewish. We'll get into that. Okay, so before I move into my story, I just wanted to take a moment with you. I really appreciated that you put in the chat just a few things of what comes to mind. If there's even just one or two people that wouldn't mind sharing very briefly, like, why are we here? Like, why was I invited to, why am I here? Like, why are we here? Why are we talking about this? Why is this important? And the why, you know, I'm not sure if you've heard of Simon Sinek, start with why. Any business, anything we ever do, start with why. And I know you know why, I really do. And so I'm not trying to like be by any means, but I think it's important for us to just to be reminded of the importance of having a strong why as individuals and as organizations and as a community. Any takers? Even one person who feels brave enough wants to share what's your why? I'm going to share my why in just a moment, but any takers? Don't be shy.
All right, I'll try it.
Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome. Why equity, diversity, and inclusion? Because that's who we are. It's where we come from. I mean, I'm not from New Jersey, as everybody will remind me as my accent kicks in. But so we're diverse from, where did we come from? Where did we go to college? Where did we grow up? What did, you know, how were we raised? How were we disciplined? How did that impact us? All of those pieces make up who you are as an individual. So Jewish equity, diversity, inclusion, it's sort of all of those pieces of the puzzle that make up the question also make us up as human beings.
Such a high level, what you're describing. It's a part of who we are. It's in our humanity. It's in our origin stories, whether the Jewish or where we're from geographically. It's also like what I'm hearing from what you're saying. Again, that humanity that, you know, the rabbis ask, why does the Torah start with Adam and Eve? It could have started with Exodus or with Sinai. And it's to say that, you know, the rabbi, and they asked this question about 1600 years ago, Adam Yechidi, why was Adam and Eve created first? So that you don't say your ancestors are greater than my ancestors, or your ancestors are worse than my ancestors, right? That we realize that we're kind of all in this human thing together. By the way, the officially debunking race as a biological idea only happened around 22, 23 years ago, when finally science said that there's no significant biological difference between people because of the color of their skin, right? That all humans, right? So that reminder. So for me, this is my reason why, as a Black Jew with white skin, as a kid who grew up in Muncie, in the ultra-Orthodox community, as someone who's my teenage rebellion was becoming modern Orthodox in many ways. You know, I didn't know Hatikva growing up. Israel wasn't really in when I went to Kushner for high school, which was modern Orthodox, I only realized then that I had been raised differently and that there were all these different kinds of more, you know, and then really the first time, sometimes people say, the first time I met a Black person was in college. For me, the first time I met a non-Orthodox person was in college. And I had been around Muslims and Methodists, Buddhists, my whole side of my family, but in terms of like opening my mind to inclusivity and belonging, religious diversity, social diversity more broadly, those are some of my reasons why, you know, and I'll also just say that like working at JFNA, working for Jewish federations, thinking about the work of our generation, thinking about this work on a generational timeline, not on a 1 program, 2 program, or 3 program, or even 5 program, which is awesome. But like I'm like, for genuinely for us, for our children, for our grandchildren, for our legacy that we uphold. Those are some of mine. Here's some that I put down. And I really encourage, I would love if you put in the chat if you're up to it, but here are some of my reasons why, and then also organizationally and also communally, I think some reasons why. Flourishing Jewish communities is about all of us. We have a spiritual, religious, moral obligation. We're becoming more diverse. The year 2044, according to American demographers, is when America will become, for the first time, a majority non-white society. And the Jewish community is not too far behind that. There are about 1 million American Jews of color, people who are non-European descent. So there's conversations there. Leadership development and diversity. How do we step up as leaders? Are we equipped? Do we have the right language? Do we have the skill sets, the knowledge, the relationships, the stamina? How do we help each other? And Jewish engagement, people say like, Rabbi, how do you know this is just like not a fad? The whole race thing. How do you know? Number one, like it's my whole life. So I'm like, I don't know how to respond to that answer. But second to that, I would say because the Gen Zers won't let us make it a fad, right? The young people, this is a part of their Torah, So anyway, a little bit about, I was born and raised in Muncie, New York. I think you may have heard of Muncie. And in a way, I had a typical Muncie upbringing. Well, I think my Wi-Fi just cut out for a sec. Are you guys good? Do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I have kind of typical upbringing. I was raised culturally Haredi. I had sidewalks, I had pace until I was 10. And I would joke that Muncie's a really diverse place if you're Ashkenazi and Orthodox. You'll see to the left some of what I associate mostly with Muncie, and then my family kind of in the middle. And then that little heart, that gray heart on the top right, that's where my house is. That's where my parents live today. So they're in like New Hempstead. It's like right outside of Muncie. Anyway, we could go deeper. We should go on a tour. New Square is not too far from where I grew up. And is Muncie diverse? Yeah, in certain ways. Is it racially diverse? No, it's really not. Like, it's just not. And there were a few of us. And I'm just curious, where did you grow up? Susan, you were starting to say, that you're not originally from Jersey.
I grew up in Boston. I grew up outside of Boston. Yeah.
Friends, where did you grow up? Tell us. Put it in the chat. Let us know. I'm seeing other reason why in the chat. I just want to say it's important to make our communities places where everyone really does feel welcome, and where we are all making that welcome a reality by becoming aware of the ways that we have excluded certain groups unintentionally. Thank you, Cantor Risa. What Cantor Risa is saying, I think, is just so important, and there's steps there. That's a part of a strategic plan right there. The undoing, the learning, the things that we need to move things forward with. My why is personal because of my diverse family of a Jewish nephew and niece of color and 3 grandchildren that are 3rd generation Holocaust descendants. Wow, Nancy. American love. I don't know where you're from exactly, Nancy, but the story there, the combinations of it's just the beauty of our 21st century. Like, what? Like, just that sentence, it's like, and it's beautiful. And it's a lot to hold. It's a legacies. And okay, so see, we're even, we say everyone's from Jersey. Look at this. Look at the regional diversity where we're from. And by the way, where we're from matters. I know some of the title here was unconscious bias. I think Harvard uses the language of implicit bias. That's how we use it also at JFNA. Unconscious is kind of like slightly more passive, I guess. Bias already is slightly passive, but all is to say is when thinking about biases, it's classic sessions will include, where are you from? What's your background? What's your own biography? What's your own context? Because that's where everyone has biases, where you can't escape them. The fact that this is the picture I put up of Muncie, that's my bias, right? That's my experience. That's how I associate. That's where my go-to thoughts are, and I almost can't control that slightly, So here are my parents. I'm literally here because of them. And I'm grateful to them. And my mother tells a story that when my parents met, my father wasn't religious. My father said that she didn't have to convert. My mother said, what are you talking about? I have a Jewish neshama. It's who I am. And to that's when my mother really inspired my father to go more on a Jewish journey, which I hear is common actually, when people fall in love, depending, I guess, what direction you go in on the faith. But with my parents, then they met a Chabad rabbi, and kind of the rest is history. That's kind of how I became a mixed race Jew from Muncie, New York. And growing up, people would say all kinds of things to me about how my mom looked. They would question whether she was my mother. They would say, "Is that your nanny?" They would ask me if I were adopted. I'm not adopted. They would ask me if my mom's Ethiopian, because they like had heard, oh, like Ethiopian, I guess that makes sense. But like we just didn't fit. We were like our families were the unicorns. We were unicorn, like that. Our family just didn't fit. Maybe all of us in different ways have felt like insider outsiders, I don't know. I mean, each of us in different contexts. And we all kind of have different experiences, and even till today. And for me, having the lightest skin, I don't know, pictures don't really capture that, but I would say that like as the white sheep of my family, or as like the undercover brother, as I joke, like, I definitely would say that I, even now till today, like, especially with the circles and tables and communities that are being built, and that we're Jews of color, and we're organizing together, being a mixed race Jew, a Black Jew, with white skin in American society, with siblings and family members who don't pass, or whatever that word means, even passing, but societally knowing, and then also like going to synagogue with one parent versus another, going into school with one, like my entire life, I've explored Jewish racial identity. I encourage us all to do that, like our own racial identity, social identities. It's some of the murky. So I just want to share with you like 2 or 3 stories, and then from there, briefly about my work, and then I'll hand it off for a discussion. So here's like just 2 or 3 anecdotes that kind of capture some of my childhood. Not sure if you've seen the calculator watch before. Does anybody remember? Is this like a throwback for anyone? So for me, the calculator watch, like I'm just thinking 2nd grade. It's like the Apple Watch of like the late 80s, early 90s. Like that's, every kid wanted a calculator watch. And it was during like the Grace After Meals, the Berkat Hamazon, in the lunchroom. There were like 400 little boys, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, whatever it was. And the little boy leans into me and he says that, he's like, "You're not Jewish." And I'm like, "What?" And he says, "How could you be Jewish? Your mom's Black." And I remember like immediately I froze, and I was like, "Oh my God, he's right." And I started crying. And then the rabbi grabbed my hand. He's like, and in my head, like the rabbi in his head was saying, "Oh, a Rothstein, like another Rothstein thing. Like, okay, like we've done this before, I'm the youngest, So he took me to the principal's office. The principal didn't say anything to me. He just actually hands me a brand new package, cellophane wrapped calculator watch. And he says to me, "Let's just make a deal between me and you. Don't tell your mother about this." And because like, he deals with my mom twice a week or whatever. And I'm a little kid, So I'm like, "Great, no problem." And I get home, my mom sees the calculator watch. Immediately, she's like, "Where did you get that calculator watch?" And I said, "Oh, Rabbi so-and-so gave it to me. And he said not to say that a kid said you're not Jewish because you're Black. And that's why he gave it to me." And to that, my mom took the watch, went down to the principal's office. And I would hope we would say this wouldn't happen today, but I do think it says something about, again, bias. It also says something about our leadership. Like, who told that child that they could say that to me? Why did I believe that child? Like, who told me that? Why did I think that they were right? How come the principal or the rabbi who led me to the principal didn't have the skill sets, or no, like there was not all of the things, there's just a lot of things there. Another story I'll share is like, my mom tells me a story that when she was going to Jewish classes, there was a rabbi who would use the word schwarza, which is the N-word in Yiddish. And my mom went over to the rabbi and said, "Dude," I mean, I would say dude. She probably didn't say dude, but she was like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "You're a rabbi, you're speaking Torah. How do you use that word?" And the rabbi's like, "Oh, I'm not talking about you." And to that, I'm talking about them. And to that, my mother told the rabbi that, like, what would you do if the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, used that word? I'm sorry, the rabbi asked that to my mother. My mother said the Rebbe would never use that word. And to that rabbi stopped using the word. And like, it's just like the calculator watches, other stories. Like my mother, she did teach me how to like kind of be in relationship with people, even when they're causing you maybe some distress. I don't know how you feel about that, but it's something I think about. One last thing I'll share is, growing up, again, I'm biased, what you see and what you get. I would get Parsha sheets, like the weekly Torah portion. This is not exactly it on the left, but the weekly Torah portion, like let's say, this week's Torah portion is Moses and the building of the tabernacle. What did Moses look like in like my second and third and fifth grade education, Haredi day school? Moses looked like a man with a strimal from Eastern Europe, like a white European guy. And I would color these sheets in, I'd bring them home, and my mom would grab my hand and she'd say like, hey, I just want to make sure, like, do you think Moshe's skin tone looked more like my skin tone or your skin tone? And she was just like, it's just an example of like things she would bring to me, in conversation. And so, friends, as I come here and I share with you a little bit about my background, I'm in the bottom left, if you could spot me. American Jews of color, we're here, and we're here really through primary three origin stories, like American Jews of color. We're here through immigration, right? Meaning we've been Jewish for generations from other countries like India or Ethiopia or other places of the sort. We're here through love, like adoption, or marriage or relationships, interracial love, or we're here through joining the tribe. And the term, how many, data, how we think about inclusive leadership, we got to go deeper. It's a round two, we should, and it's just something to think about. And the field has changed so much. Like this is 5 years ago. This is the founding of the Jews of Color Field Building Initiative, which is really a shift for the organized Jewish community. I think thinking about race not as a us-them conversation, but an us conversation. Like we have Jews of color, and we have people of color in our communities, a shift in consciousness. In the last 9 months, in the last year, the Jews of color led organizations nationally has doubled. Like the field is alive. There's so much going on. But it might surprise you that out of the million Jews of color, if we say that number, even if we call it 700,000, which is like a more conservative, or 800,000, which is a more conservative number, there are about 100 Jews of color that are Jewish professionals that focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion. So it's a kind of a new area of focus. And this is where I'll close. Like, the work I do each day, I lead our JEDI initiative, which stands for Jewish Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And really our aim is that nobody should feel left out of our communities, bottom line, because of anything. Like again, the whys and the hows and the whos and the whats, like our communities should be sacred, where we all feel like we are celebrated, where we all feel like we're not excluded or second, and creating that space. We could do that in concrete ways. One is our education. Here are our core pillars. Two is through our different cohorts and project experiences around inclusivity and belonging broadly. Three is the work of public affairs and community relations, leading up to the Quinn Jeff. Four is collaboration and partnership. And a few projects that we have working at the current moment. And then this is my last slide. I just want to share it with you. It's something that's a work in progress, but there's, in terms of like 20 years from now, when we're still doing this work, how was it seen as sustainable for an organization? In my humble opinion, I could be wrong about this. I would love your feedback. But if we're doing this sustainably and where it's not reactive, but it's proactive and it's long-term, we have the internal work that we need to do, the organizational capacity building. We have the in-reach. How are we in deep relationship with the rest of the Jewish community locally and leadership? And then we have that outreach. How are we really fostering more deeply? And so I just hope that we can engage on the journey, both for the self, right? Our Ben Adam La'atzmo, our own personal individual or our organizations, and then how we relate, how we build trust, how we move at the speed of trust, and then also just how we think about the needs of our generation on a system-wide communal level with our neighbors, with our partners. And so with that, I'll just say thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for indulging me, for listening to my presentation, and also your participation. And before we enter into conversation, I just want to say again that when I look at this table, when I look at who's here with us, I just see an incredible opportunity for us together to solve for some of the most difficult and trying issues of our generation, which is again how we celebrate our humanity and our common bonds and our diversity. So I hope we can do it together. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for those remarks, Rabbi. That was really, really insightful. I wonder, can you comment on, challenges that obviously the path you're going down is, I would imagine, met with some resistance along the way and not as welcomed with open arms as we would like, or as obviously we aspire to. What types of resistance have you bumped into, and how have you overcome that?
Yes. There's two things. I think for this work to be successful, there's no magic formula. I think actually for each of us to kind of find our own voice in this discussion, and also to have our questions, concerns, being resistant, I think is actually healthy for what we're trying to accomplish for our generation. And I think it's a slow and steady process. So when it comes to where someone might be holding in a discussion, we're fluid, we're learners, and being open is one thing, right? I think, and then being not open or being triggered, I think then it's on us as people who are in community to acknowledge that and to be respectful, right? And finding the right approaches. With that said, I generally am in relationship with about 3 different kinds of people. I think through the work that I do, I would say that half of the audience that I interact with are 100% in. They're like, let's do this. We don't really know how to do it. We want to do it. We're doing it this way. We have done it. I'll show you the things that we've done. We can do it better. 50%, and the reason why, different reasons why, right? We had earlier in our presentation, different reasons why. They're in different reasons. Great. 25%, they're like, wow, this stuff feels really politicized. I don't even know, wait, I mean, so-and-so just did this, and also there was that post, and there was this problematic statement that came out, and I'm confused, also the Black Lives Matter thing, and the left and the right. And I think, the politicized pieces, people feel stuck, and they genuinely are eager, they're passionate, they believe in the work. But then there's a group of people that I work with, that I've been around, that I think I'm in the long game with, right? Because they're not ready yet. And I understand, I think if we're really respecting people and being empathetic, listen, everyone has their own story and background, and I want to meet them where they're at. And for me, I'm a unity guy. So I'm going to try to work with whoever I can for as long as I can, until they say, hey, leave me alone, And even then I still would be open. The door with, that's my style personally. But I understand for that 25%, or that third kind of person that I interact with, I would still give them a hug. They wouldn't be my go-to for any of the things that I'm working on, frankly,
Yeah. No, it's interesting. There was an article in the, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal, that tolerance of very diverse communities is obviously a pillar of our democracy, but tolerance of intolerance is toxic to that stability, right? That if we're so armed and cast a wider net and a larger tent, so to speak, that we accept those that are intolerant for their ideas as well, that becomes toxic to the rest of the community. I'm not sure if that's something you've experienced, or you've seen firsthand as well.
I mean, I think that's also a really important teaching, Jeff, like for our generation, where there is like, I don't want to stereotype, so I'm not going to say any like specific generational group or thinking, because like the stereotypes are helpful, but they're not. But one of the questions of our generation is like, where are the red lines? Are there red lines? Like, does anything go? Like, is the precedents that we have from history relevant, or is it just like, okay, bye, like let's just start over? And like the questions of tolerance versus being tolerant of, or the tolerance of intolerance, you know, speaking up. I think like, you know, two things that I'll just quickly respond to on this. I know it's a longer discussion. One is like, I think Judaism really celebrates what it means to be unity versus uniformity, like that idea, achdu versus achidu, right? That we're nonstop about being together, but we're also nonstop about 12 tribes. This week's Torah portion, the high priest would work 12 stones representing the different people. Like we're pretty big on like it being okay to have diversified approaches, different lanes. You know, and then like when it comes to like last thing, just like on the note of Purim and Haman and the natural laws of like evil in the world, there are lines, you know, how we get there, how we decide that. I think that as a global Jewish community, as a national Jewish community, as Jewish institutions, those red lines, that's some of phase one of this work, right? It's like the internal, being able to identify that. Anyway, paradox of intolerance. I'm seeing Eric put in.
Yeah, Eric, your arm must be getting tired, but you know, hopefully.
My hand is raised. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the paradox of tolerance talks about, you know, that there are limits to tolerance in a society, because if it's too tolerant, then the intolerant can take over. But anyway, thank you, Rabbi Rothstein. This has been a great dialogue. So, you know, as you mentioned, you know, we all bring our own biases. You know, they're based on our own backgrounds, our own stories. You know, I myself grew up in a traditional conservative home, but I went to a yeshiva at an Orthodox school. So even I saw some conflict there, you know, right, in my formative years. But and also, you know, very little in terms of, you know, racial diversity. You know, I remember when the first Ethiopian families came to the yeshiva. It was an eye-opener for some of us. We had never seen anything like it. I grew up in white suburbia in New Jersey. You know, there's a lot that's been going on in this space. You know, I do follow quite a bit. And, you know, how do you see the you know, not just the Orthodox communities, but also the Haredi communities, you know, opening up to these discussions? You know, I know that there was an article, and there were some great articles recently, one in JTA about Rabbi Rishon, who is taking a look at, you know, Orthodox, you know, traditional Jewish texts and the biases that exist within them, and how to, you know, sort of, I guess, reframe them. You know, certainly very interesting to open up a dialogue with something like that. And then you have the Supreme Court ruling in Israel, for example, when you just talk about internal sort of strife within the Jewish community. And, you know, you have Rabbi Weiss and Rabbi Angel's article in the Jerusalem Post that you know, it says, yeah, we're with it, we're for it, you know, because you want more people to be able to come in, and then you can always have the other sort of more nuanced conversations later down the road. But where do you see, you know, these inflection points actually happening in the really, you know, the Haredi communities, I suppose, than the Orthodox communities, but also, you know, in the Orthodox communities?
Eric, I love that question. In terms of like social anthropology and social trends and looking at generational timelines and, you know, inclusivity and belonging in our generation through the lens of your frame, I think it's really essential. And what I mean by that is that, like, you know, as a millennial, when people ask me what denomination I am, I say I'm a millennial. because Orthodoxy, I went to Orthodox rabbinical school, you know, don't get me wrong. I associate, I understand denominations and I appreciate them to an extent, but like, I'm saying this personally, not repping JFNA. I know this is on recording, but like, did denominational Judaism work? Like, I don't know. Like, as a millennial who has formally identified with denominational Judaism and still does, when I look at 21st century Judaism, I think about the fact that out of all of organized Jewish life, we're hitting like 30 or 40% of American Jewry on a good day, like Yom Kippur, you know, in Jewish communal life. Like our engagement strategies, like, are they working? Do they work? Like American Jewry, so unprecedented. And also how we got to America, all these different migration stories, as was brought up by one of our participants earlier, I forget. And like, you know, just that acknowledgement. So there's a crisis a little bit. I hate that word, but like, there's an opportunity, but there's like also this engagement conversation. So when we hike on layers, right, around who is a Jew, around race, around LGBTQ inclusion, around abilities, around socioeconomic class, around, and all of those things compounded already with an engagement issue, there's a lot of brain spinning. There's so much to think about how we engage. And I would say that the Haredi community has these questions too, 100%. The more there are books, the more there are organizations of left flanks of the Haredi world coming out and coming into being, we absolutely are seeing progress, social progress throughout the Orthodox world and the ultra-Orthodox world around equity conversations, like, and there are many examples. With that said, like, you know, the trends and the role of ritual and religion and halacha, Jewish law, in conversations around equity, like they kind of go in hand. You know, they're two important conversations that are overlap. You mentioned Rabbi Shais Rishon, that article from JTA. Shais is a lifelong friend. Our families have known each other for a long time. He has been a critical agitator. There's no question. In the field, we often, when we partner, we're like, you know, good cop, bad cop, like, you know, or they say there's the light and the fire to, like, when you build community. So he's more the fire, and exactly his work. You know, and actually in that article at the bottom is one of the co-founders of Kamocha, which is a community for Black Orthodox Jews. He put a comment, he's one of our co-founders, and Kamocha, it's the first address in the Orthodox community that's speaking about issues of race in American Jewish history, Jewish history, like, maybe not Jewish history, because it's organizations for Ethiopia, in America, focusing on Black American Jews and American Jews of color in the Orthodox community. That's Kamocha. It's at the very end of the article that Eric just put in. There's a quote from Jonas and Perry, one of the co-founders. So again, there's 2021. I mean, this is the decade. This is the decade. We'll see where we go.
Rabbi, there's a question in the chat from Cantor Risa Wallach. And I think it ties into what you were just sharing in your response to Eric, which was, how can we address the problem or challenge of Jews of color leaving the Jewish community because of negative experiences, which I think can be, you know, across from Orthodox and all of the other sects.
Yes, thank you, Cantor, for this. You know, it does, as Shana said, it goes back to the engagement conversation more generally, and then bringing in a conversation around race, like, only compounds the discussion, right? But it goes to the work that we need to do, I think, and realizing that as much as we say we're inclusive, we want to be welcoming, right? What inclusivity actually calls upon us to do, and what our theory of change that we're building through JFNA is, what are the barriers that might exist that we might not be aware of? What have people seen? What are we putting out into the world, right? Like, for me, as an example, growing up, when going to synagogue, what's the rabbi talking about? Do I see myself in what the rabbi's saying? Again, even if we take race out of the conversation for a second, right? Because then you're like, oh, right, like, I felt that way too, you know, or like, what's the top leadership putting out into the world? Hopefully it's neutral if it's not like proactive, but sometimes it's negative, right? So it's like the experiences, I think, of representation being seen in the community. I think the ultimate goal is living in a multi-faith, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural democracy, right? Where it works for everyone. That is the ultimate goal. And in the Jewish community too, that we should be able to be a community that's by default multiracial, and that people shouldn't feel. And so right now, what I would just say to your question, Cantor Risa, you know, I think some of what I'm hoping for our generation is that, like, there are a lot of cohorts, there's a lot of networks, you know, Jews of color cohorts, Jews of color networks, Jews of color this, and like, there's like a lot going on. It's like almost saturated, arguably, like, you know, for the first time ever, like the manna is falling and there's just too much of it, but God forbid. But the point is that, you know, the goal is that, like, we do need these programs for leadership development, for capacity building, but the goal is that we should have a multiracial community, and that should be normative, right? It shouldn't be that I'm like scrambling for, like, how do I get a Jew of color on my board, right? Like, what do you mean? We're a multiracial Jewish community. You have people in your community that have been a part of your community. Like, that's the goal. So to get there, right now, I think we do need affinity spaces for healing, reflection. What do people need? Mentorship, leadership development, capacity building. But the goal should be that we're able to be in a normative, multiracial Jewish community.
So, Rabbi, how do we get there? How do we say, like, you know, it's sort of awkward. Now, I come up from a family where, you know, my nephew is adopted. He's Black. I am not quite 5 feet tall. He's 6'2". We are together. I say, this is my nephew. People look at me like I have 3 heads. They don't understand this part of my family. Okay. So how do you go to somebody and say, you on the outside are different from the way I am? And I want to discuss that with you so that we can find the commonalities without sounding condescending or seeming like you're pandering. Or how do you open the conversation in a constructive way? Or what would you suggest? Maybe are some tools we can use for that. So
as individuals versus organizations, it's two different conversations, but they run parallel, right? And I want to raise again and just show you kind of our theory of change. The self, I mean, first and foremost, exposure, knowledge, learning, reading, doing our own internal work on our own. We don't necessarily need consultants to do the initial heavy burden and lift for, like, learning and becoming more educated and building our own muscles and doing the spiritual push-ups so that it's in our bones, right? So that we feel like we're able to, like, wait, I have a sense of what's going on, so that when I want to be in relationship with whoever, I kind of have like a sense of an opinion on my own, right? From my own experiences of learning and knowledge. Doesn't mean you know everything, but the key is, first stage is the self. And for organizations, it's, what are we talking about? The core pillars, right? Which is the education. For us, we have a 7-part curriculum, the Jedi curriculum, that we're developing for the Jewish communal nonprofit sector. We're launching our first cohort of a half a dozen plus federations that will be piloting, right? And that's one core pillar, inclusivity and belonging. We have projects there that we are engaging in and setting goals. But again, the point is that in all areas, we should be exploring from the Jewish lens, from the historical lens, from the current events lens, right? That learning, that exposure. And then it's applying that, what we're learning, what we're gaining from being in, by the way, the 4th pillar is partnership and collaboration, right? We do this together. It's applying and maintaining that lens, skills building, leadership development for the entire staff, applying the lens of learning around Jedi to the marketing, to FRD, to CRC, to full frame. And why? Because then what are we doing for the Jews of color or people who maybe feel on the margins? We're signaling. It's a signal. It's a light post that we're saying, we really care about this work. We're not just doing a program. which is holy, by the way. I really do think that the importance of coming together for even one program for education is important. But when we do that internal work, we signal work, and we're also creating an environment that is conducive to supporting Jews of color, right? You bring, God forbid, I can tell you horror stories, okay, of really kind, good-hearted people trying to have more representation in their leadership, where the approach was just something happened, and it ended up being now a horrible reputation being spread about how an organization functions around race. And it's like, and to me, like, like I know the colleagues from that organization I'm thinking about in my head, and I know they meant so well. They just didn't focus on phase one, the self, the organization. They didn't, the environment wasn't ready. The environment wasn't ready, so that when that person came in, they experienced all these microaggressions. People were well-meaning, but they weren't educated. And then, like, don't get me wrong, going into the public square first is important. Also, our neighbors are there, they're live, they're with us, they're there. It's important, it's happening. So it's not like you should wait to go to the third phase of outreach. But as a Jew of color, I'll tell you, I've heard this so many times from friends, like when an organization in the Jewish community institution does a Black Jewish program, and by Black Jewish, I don't mean Black and Jewish, I mean like Black communities that are non-Jewish and Jews, and they haven't even reached out to the Jews of color in their community first. I've heard like at least 3 or 4 times people saying like, how come they didn't reach out to me? Like, I'm a Jew of color in the community, and they reached out to the pastor first to talk about race. Like how come they didn't reach out to me? And it's like interesting to think about what is like, if, you know, we have our own lanes, we have our own brands, but as Jewish communal organizations, synagogues, schools, camps, how are we in relationship about this work? How are we in conversation about this work? Who's in the field? Anyway, I'll pause there, and then it's the third phase. So how do we get there? This is my long, short version of it. I think there's like much more nuance to provide around like metrics and goals and evaluation for each of these 3 areas. But it's some of the framework that I think works. Yes, I'm seeing a hand. Elaine. Sorry, Jeff, I just took your job.
No. How about it?
I've been on several programs where I've listened to panels speaking, and they were Jews of color speaking, and their stories are really sad. And the people who invited them in, or they came to a congregation, let's say on a Friday night, and the issues that came up for the Black Jews were at the Oneg, they were approached and asked kind of bizarre questions like, you know, what are you doing here? I mean, it sounds gross, but in discussing this with people, some of my colleagues say, oh, but we were just curious. But that's the part about the individual doing the homework and learning what are those biases that you have. Because I always say to people, it's appropriate to ask that question when you built a relationship first. You don't come at someone, but I was just being curious and friendly. But it doesn't come across that way. You have to learn what we all have as our biases. One thing that really, I do a lot of work with echoes and reflections. Are you familiar with the program? It's about the Holocaust learning, and it's for teachers who teach about the Holocaust. And there's lots of material, by the way, and you can all go on there. They're not necessarily all for educators, but there's a ton of stuff that you can get out of that. It's called Echoes and Reflections. Just look it up. There are tons of resources out there for us, but I'm in South Jersey. I have a friend who let me know about this program, so I'm very happy to be here. A lot of times we don't know where the Jewish people of color are in our community. We would graciously invite them to our synagogue, but we have no idea. They're not coming to us, and we don't know how to appropriately approach anybody. I looked into that, with our Jewish Federation to try to get a grant. I think it would be really great to get kids together. When I taught a program where we went to Camden and we got just Black children and white children together, and we had common activities, and we brought those kids to our homes, and we went to Camden and had a potluck dinner with Camden families. And truly, we were building a community of kids that really enjoyed each other working on common projects. So, I mean, there are many, many ways that we can do this, but I don't also know how to get started. If you have ideas, we'd love to hear those.
On the note of like leadership pipelines, and then also like building the relationships, like how do we create those channels? It's so true, like so beautifully said. And it really goes back also to what Robin, you were mentioning in your question. So Elaine, thank you. I think like, I mean, there's no question, it's relationships. And at the end of the day, like, the work, JFNA, right, we serve and work together with 146 independent federations and 300 network communities. And the work we do, like, as national, like what are we if we're not in relationships with our local partners? It's just an example, like, and deep relationship, like the idea that we're truly, and so on that note, like, I think it's the hardest part of this work, honestly, is being in ongoing relationship and cultivating trust and buy-in and really meeting people where they're at and identifying what people need, what people's hopes are, what people's fears are. That's like the hard work around this that I think is the toughest part for people to acknowledge. We want results. But the process, it's like the most muddled and the most sacred. And that's kind of where the therapy is, right? It's all identity-based. It's all about kind of our positionality, the relationships we're trying to build. So there's a lot there, but trust, relationships. That's what community organizing is, by the way. If you like look for a good definition, it's usually the like really one by one, trust, needs, identify, The last thing I'll just say is that, like, I think there's like, we as a Jewish people and the collective we that we should be in danger of bringing up. But I would say just like something that I find is like there's like a positive like Jewish neuroses, like we want to get things done, but then there's like a negative Jewish neuroses of like holidays and time and details and this and that, and we move and like when it comes to this conversation in the Jewish community today, there's like this intense energy of like, oh my gosh, we don't have representation on our boards. Oh my gosh, like we don't have someone who's LGBTQ in our teams. Oh my gosh, like I can't believe we didn't have a wheelchair until last year. Like make sure no one knows about that. Or, oh my gosh, like all these things, like, that we kind of get really caught up in the community politics. Like, I think it's okay if you're like, we don't know Jews of color in our community at the moment. Like, and we don't even know who we would invite to like, to be in conversation with before we do the board or like program, or like to just get in connection with, like, we don't even know where to start. That's okay, by the way, it really is. I think that's why for the generation, the greatest gift we can do, even if we're like not sure where the relationships lead, is creating spaces that are equitable and inclusive. Because then we're putting a big bat signal up. Like, if, I don't know, I love Batman. I don't know what your favorite superheroes were, but like we're putting a big a beacon saying like, hey, like we totally care about the experience of people when they come into our, and that I think actually helps with the overall experience of the community, right? And then it's people who know people, and frankly, we already heard 3 people on this call that have family members who are of color, right? So it's like, you know, it's the slow and steady, but if we could create that environment, it really signals out, it goes far, our spaces that we're open to a diversified Jewish community. I think it will go far.
Any other questions, guys? No, well, this was, oh yeah, Nancy, go ahead. I'm sorry, you have a, oh, just unmute yourself first.
First of all, I just want to thank you for this program, and Rabbi, I want to thank you for your remarks, because there's nothing tougher than to engage in the conversation that you're trying to engage in. I want to thank Elaine for trying to get to the nuance of relationships, because that's the essence of the kind of work that we really do have to do. Organizations can't start it and can't do it. It's really the relationships. And I just wanted to leave everyone with the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom. I don't know if Rabbi, if you know about the sisterhood, but Elaine, if you don't know about it, and Rabbi, if you don't know about it, this is a group of Jewish women and Muslim women that meet once a month in friendship over food. And it's been organized by Cheryl Olinsky. It's in its 8th year. It's a national organization now, but it was first founded in New Jersey, and I'm a member of it from inception. There are Jewish women of color, and there are Black women that are Muslim in this group. It is more diverse than anything, and I have friendships that are lifelong friendships from the women in this group. It started when the Muslim ban began in a lot of ways. So it is really the kind of group that you need. You need to develop friendships on a lower level. And this group also has a teen division, so that there are teenagers now that are engaging in this. And so that's the kind of work we have.
What's it called? It's called Salam Shalom. What is
the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom. And Rabbi, I know you will love this. So
I'm looking it up right now.
yes, yes.
It sounds amazing.
And anyone can form a chapter with it anywhere. South Jersey may not have that many chapters. So Rabbi, I know you wanted to be part of this.
I'm so down. Is there like a brotherhood, a siblinghood? Is it just the
you,
sisterhood?
you could probably form one. You could speak to Cheryl Olinsky and start the brotherhood, because the idea would be
Or the siblinghood. Or, right.
Yeah, exactly the same thing. They have
Nice.
national conventions as well now. Cory Booker was a big fan of the whole group too.
Wow, I'm seeing it now. I just liked it on Facebook, by the way. That sounds awesome.
Foundations have been supporting this now, but they're fabulous. Robin knows about it.
I'll tell you, Nancy, on that note, you just brought me to this. I haven't shared this story, I don't know in how long, but I was in Turkey for a summer with the JDC, working in a Jewish day camp, Turkey. And I was living in a compound, it was guarded up, like, you know, walled up. I had to show my passport every time I went in. And there was a Muslim family that lived on the premises while I was living there for the summer. And I would take out my guitar and we would sing together, Odiavo Shalom Aleinu, Odiavo, and they're Muslim, they're not Jewish, and they would sing Odiavo, they would say Salam Shalom. So Shalom, Salam. Anyway, you brought me back to that, and it's true. Just on the note of peace and on the note of food, you're right. It's like both of those, like.
We sing that every Friday night in our service, that song. It is so beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
We should not give up on that idea, you know?
Yeah.
Can I make another suggestion? Something we're doing in South Jersey is we have a guest reader program where a lot of us go into the schools, and we're doing it virtually. And we read books about tolerance to different grade levels, and we have just wonderful discussions with all the kids. Where we go into, it's the word gets out that we're available, and the person from the Jewish Community Relations Council gets in touch with us, and we volunteer to go and read a book to the kids, appropriate books that are, we have lists and we have ideas of discussion questions. So it really is a wonderful program you might think about.
Thank you.
So thank you again, Rabbi Rothstein, for your remarks, your insights, and certainly this opened a lot of minds and eyes in terms of how we can handle unconscious bias and widen our tent, so to speak. So thank you again for your time this evening. Robin, any remarks, comments, closing notes?
No, if you want to learn more about the Jedi program or about what our federation is doing or what federations nationally are doing together, you can reach out to us, info@jfedshaw.org. For those of you who don't have any of our personal emails, that's the easiest one to remember. And we will continue with this work in our community. And if you want to be part of that, also let us know. Our Community Relations Council is happy to have you join us in doing this important work in our community. So thank you everybody for coming. Have a wonderful evening. Have a happy Pesach. And thank you so much, Rabbi Rothstein. Thank you, Jeff, for working so hard on coordinating this program and for leading us through the conversation. So good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you,
Great
guys.
program. Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.